Hello and welcome everybody to the video that I promised you nearly 3 weeks ago, but failed to actually do. So hopefully this screen recording is working. Hopefully it's also actually taking the input from my microphone. So I promised to make a video about the yearly release of the global mining output data for almost all metals and minerals, although some are just grouped together, like platinum group metals and rare earths are all just grouped as their respective name. So, said data is released by the USGS, and at the end of February, as usual, they released the set for this year, which is technically the data concerning last year. And also, as you previously saw, they had all the other, previous years back to 1997 that you can also look at as well. You go down, and you have everything you want. At least almost everything. You got your cobalt coming out of the Congo, although the US does mine some, a little bit, up in Minnesota. Beryllium, bauxite, which is where we get aluminum from. So each thing will have 2 pages. The first page here contains US data, and it'll have, production from the mines. Amount recycled will be down there as well, although there's no recycling of bauxite ore, for example, here, because you don't recycle ore, you recycle the metal that you get out of the ore. So the actual amount of aluminum recycled you would find up in the aluminum page itself. And then it'll also tell you down in this paragraph, it'll tell you like what percentages were used for what stuff. So 70% of the bauxite and alumina ore was used to actually make aluminum. So then you scroll down, and then the second page for each thing is the international page, where you have the primary or biggest global producers will be listed, and then everyone else just gets thrown under other countries down there. And then you'll have the world total. And this should be million tons, if I'm data in 1,000 metric tons. So, yes, obviously 129,000 is 129 million. So, these are the totals that you'll see. And then off to the side, we'll have the total reserves, which reserves are out of the total amount that we know is actually out there in the ground. Reserves are what we know based on current prices and based on current mining capabilities we can definitively extract from the ground. The resource, which will be down here, the resource is just the grand total amount altogether that we know is there. Whether we can actually dig it up or not, or whether we can afford to dig it up or not. You got arsenic, barite, which is where we get barium from, bauxite's where aluminum comes from, beryllium, bismuth, boron, bromine, cadmium, cesium, chromium, clay, cobalt, copper, everything. All the way down to zinc and zirconium even. But okay, so you see how everything's set up, and so I gathered data like this. I just went back through each year, one by one, all the way back to 97, and gathered the totals and everything, and put them up together in my, let me full screen this, in my dumb Excel chart here. And why am I in the middle? Let's go up to the top. And I laid everything out, and then I made graphs. The graphs are over to the side. We'll get to those. So we're going to start with lead and work our way down. I don't remember why in any particular way I went in this order. I have no idea, so don't try to ask me that in the comments. I don't have an answer. All that's going to do is boost my view traffic. So the row of graphs that we'll examine up here on the top, those are the ones that production is still increasing globally. The middle ones here are for metals and minerals whose production has clearly peaked. And the bottom row is for metals and minerals whose global production seems a bit more ambiguous. We will start with these one by one. So I'm going to take a look at lead. And I'm sorry I did not colorize all of these and make them all too visually appealing. But start with lead here. Let's amplify the size of the graph just a little bit, make it a bit clearer. Okay, so global lead production did indeed peak back in 2013, or between 2013 and between 2012 and 2013, and has been declining since then. Has lost about 15% or so. It got up to around 5.5 million tons per year mined out of the ground, and has now dropped down to just below 4.5 million tons. Now, lead prices have not completely spiked up yet in response, because for this big upshoot here, the production output globally was climbing faster than demand. Demand was climbing only about half as quickly. So that big production bump did sort of overshoot demand and gave us sort of a global surplus of lead supply. And then afterwards, I believe, the next one down was molybdenum. But for some reason, molybdenum is way off somewhere. So we'll just go with zinc, which is also mined in the millions of tons per year. And zinc is still increasing. It did hit a bit of a bump, and production did sort of stagnate for the last several years and declined a little bit. But all preliminary indications are it is going to keep going on its way upward. Tin, which everyone thinks is ridiculously common, is actually not as abundant of a metal as everyone seems to think it is. Its production is measured in thousands of tons per year, and it did have a peak point back around 2007 or so, but has since recovered from that and seems for the better part to be still increasing, is now back up above 300,000 tons per year again. Another item that has already peaked in global production is antimony. Antimony is not a material that many people are actually familiar with. Antimony production is measured in thousands of tons a year and peaked back in 2007 or 2008. Just below 200,000 tons, and has been steadily declining ever since then. Antimony is used in a variety of things, from credit card mag strips to flame retardant and suppressant materials. Nickel is a bit more unclear, but is also mined in millions of tons per year. Nickel's used in an awful lot of alloys and is externally plated onto a lot of metals because it's extremely resistant to corrosion. Especially for ships, it's extremely resistant to saltwater corrosion. Nickel had a bit of a first peak up at around 2.6 million tons per year and was falling, but now it's resumed climbing, and it hasn't yet reached or surpassed that period yet, so I'm throwing it into the ambiguous category, as it's now back up to about 2.3 million tons per year, and nickel consumption is now beginning to climb extremely fast, as it is also extremely important in the production of electric vehicle batteries. Gallium, a relatively rare metal that is necessary for semiconductors, necessary for the manufacturing of solar panels, necessary for the manufacturing of numerous superconductors involved in the use of maglevs, required in the manufacturing of fiber optic cables, which allow us our modern instantaneous communication infrastructure, all kinds of various things, and also LED lighting, which is every lighting nowadays, and also touch sensors, which is every surface nowadays. Not really, but we're going there. Gallium production is just measured in tons per year, but gallium production had somewhat of an initial peak just below 450 tons per year back in 2013, 2012, and dropped, but is now heading back up. Again, like nickel, hasn't reached that initial first point yet, but is still shooting back upwards, so we throw it into the ambiguous category. Then we move over a little bit some more, and the all-important metal copper. Copper truly runs our civilization, as that's obviously what allows us to be surrounded by and have access to so much electricity. Copper has no inhibition about it whatsoever, is just still going straight up. No real bumpy ride like tin or zinc had. Now almost double its yearly production in 1997. Global mining output has now reached over 21 million tons per year. And we had a semi-plateau and apparent sharp drop-off after a peak in global garnet production for things like garnet that you might think are just used for, jewelry or for X purpose. You can actually find they're used for a lot of things. Abrasive blasting, water filtration, abrasive powders, non-slip coatings, sandpaper, ceramics, glass, electronics, filtration glass, glass polishing, petroleum industry even. You got all these other uses for stuff that many people might not be aware of. Indium production has semi-peaked, but appears to be coming back up, so it was enough for me to throw it into the ambiguous category. Indium is all around you. Indium tin oxide is what's used for a lot of electronic screen LEDs. It's also used in the touch sensors of a lot of touch screens. It's also used in the manufacturing of solar panels. It's also used in fiber optics. It's also used in pretty much everything around you, whether or not you know it. So back up to the top row here, we have the rare earths. Their production each year has still been increasing. And in the very recent years, China has been ramping up its mining operations a lot, so production's been shooting up for the moment, especially as demand for rare earths is constantly being driven up right now by everything from increased electric vehicle sales globally, increased electronic sales and production, especially as third world countries are continuing to modernize, and also as well everyone trying to dive into renewable energy, which doesn't even broadly mean renewable energy as a whole anymore. It basically just means wind and solar, because that's all anyone ever tries to focus on, both of which happen to require a lot of rare earth materials, actually. Down on the post-peak production row, we have germanium, one of the few rare earth materials that actually gets its own entire section of data in the USGS releases, and one of the ones which solar panels are majorly dependent on, along with also computer devices and a lot of precision laser devices used in the manufacturing process. So, as you can see, obviously, germanium's not all that abundant. It's measured in just tons, not million tons, not 1,000 tons, just tons. And we just began 1 year of a renewed increase. So if we have a few more years of renewed increase without coming back up towards that peak point, then I'll end up having to put germanium down the bottom row of ambiguous. But for the moment, it looks like germanium production has peaked, and the peak was around 164, 165 tons. And down on the bottom row, we have tungsten, measured in 1,000 tons. It's peaked twice so far, and looks to be flattening off, which is why I have it down in the ambiguous section. And both peaks, ironically, were around the same amount, of around 90,000 tons a year. Tungsten is a very heavy and very, very strong metal, so it's used in a select few high-strength alloys. All right, skirting over here some more, we have phosphate rock, which thankfully, for the moment, production is still increasing. We have recently hit 270 million tons per year. Phosphate rock is what we grind and crush up into phosphorus fertilizer. And particularly the mining of phosphate rock is actually what allows us to churn out so much fertilizer so quickly at a rate that allows us to output the amount of crop growth that we actually do in the modern age, which allows us to feed the current civilization population size that we have. Fluorspar. Fluorspar has evidently peaked. We did have one positive gain again, but then it resumed falling. Now we have had one more year of positive gain again. So we'll have to see if it starts increasing again. I'll throw it down into the ambiguous category like usual. But it appears to have peaked for the moment, so around 7.5 million tons per year. Fluorspar, obviously, or at least hopefully obviously from the name, is our primary source of obtaining fluoride or fluorine. Now, don't start worrying about your supply of toothpaste just yet, because dental and medical products actually only make up about 9% of our fluoride/fluorine consumption globally. The actual primary major consumers of our fluoride or fluorine supply are actually the smelting of metal alloys. Fluoride or fluorine is added in some of them at least, that wouldn't, flow or shape into molds as easily. Apparently adding fluoride or fluorine actually makes them, more malleable when they're molten, makes them more likely to take to the mold shape that you're trying to get it into. And the other half of the majority of it is consumed just in the general chemical industry, usually in the form of hydrofluoric acid, which then just gets consumed usually in a catalytic process to make other things. All right, down here again in the ambiguous category, since it's been, climbing for numerous years since its sudden peak and drop off, and also because we all know iron is not one of the things that's really going to completely peak anytime soon, for real at least. But for the moment, it did have a sudden peak and drop off recently, but has been climbing up ever since then. It peaked at around 3.4 billion tons per year and fell almost down to 2.2 billion tons per year, but over the past couple of years since that, it has climbed back up to 2.5 billion tons per year. And iron, I'm not going down like a use train for iron because you should all know. It's just steel. It's not all steel, but it's basically all just used to make steel. 2% of it is used in a particular ferrous compound that's really important in cleaning and treating wastewater. But again, that's like 2% of the global iron supply gets consumed for that. Here we have lithium production measured in 1,000 tons per year. And here you can see, if you overlaid the graph of yearly electric vehicle sales, you would see basically a match right here with this massive upshoot. Down here we have yttrium, which is another rare earth material, and which is part of what makes LEDs, the lights that we've all switched over to now for the sake of energy efficiency. LEDs, at least the common ones, use a particular metal diode by the acronym of YAG, Y-A-G, which is yttrium, arsenic, gallium. But yttrium, measured in 1,000 tons, though barely, it peaked just under 9,000 tons per year and had a plateau and came down, bumped back up, and has since remained level. But it's been almost 10 years of it kind of not really indicating that it's going back up, so I'm keeping it in the peaked category for the moment. Silver is down here in the ambiguous category, as it appears to have peaked in 2015 and was going down, but then just this last year it came up again by a tiny bit, so I threw it into ambiguous. We'll wait and see when the next set of data comes out, if it keeps ticking up again, or if it resumes declining, or if it goes flat. But silver's peak was around 28,000 tons per year, and as of the moment is down around 26,000 tons a year. And just as with gold, aside from, jewelry and, ingots that are kept in reserves, silver is a very crucial part of computers and electronics. And now that everyone's going crazy for solar panels, that's beginning to eat up a lot of the global silver supply. It's shot up from less than 1% of yearly consumption to around 11 or 12% of yearly silver consumption. And for the moment, demand from solar panel manufacturing has just been filling in a gap that's been gradually left as traditional photography has died out, because traditional photography used silver compounds on the photography paper to develop it. But we're reaching the end of that, where, traditional photography is almost completely dead. And once traditional photography is dead, there's no more gap that solar is just like filling in. Then it's just going to be butting heads with everything else. And we have molybdenum, measured in 1,000 tons, up at about 300,000 tons a year now. Molybdenum is used in a lot of various alloys. It's more commonly used to add heat resistance to metals and to raise the melting temperature of various alloys, which is why one of the main consumers is in aircraft engines and also in regular internal combustion engines. And in our peak area, although you may consider this ambiguous, we have titanium, measured in 1,000 tons per year. Titanium had gotten up to about 210,000 tons. Then it peaked and fell down. Then it rose, and now it's declining very slightly again. Titanium is a high-strength metal. It's not normally used just by itself. It's usually alloyed with other things, but its primary use, whether by itself or in an alloy form, is to give metals high strength. And down here, something everybody overlooks, we have sand, and one of the few other things measured in billions of tons. Now, sand does not mean any sand. We mean industrial-grade sand, which is a very specific type of sand. Basically, you can just think water-weathered instead of wind-weathered, which means desert sand is useless to us. We need things like former ocean bottom sand, or former beach sand, or current beach sand in some places, or riverbed sand, or river floodplain sand. So global sand production had an initial peak back in 2006, right above 1.4 billion tons per year, then dropped, but has been increasing since then. Hasn't quite reached that point again yet, which is why it's down in the ambiguous category, but has reached about just under 1.3 billion tons per year now. And industrial-grade sand is one of the most important things to our civilization. Apart from your most automatic instincts probably being to assume that it's used for glass. Well, it is, obviously. Glass is, burnt sand. However, its most common use, and its most important use, is as a construction material. It is used to make concrete. It's used to make cement. It's used just as an aggregate or a filler material in construction processes as well. Industrial-grade sand is what forms our civilization. And despite its production levels, we actually might be having some supply issues with it soon. But we'll talk about those another time. Chromium, measured in million tons per year. Chromium has been still going up, granted more in a stair-steppy fashion, as you can see. Most recently, it's gotten up to 36 million tons per year. Chromium, most often used in an alloy with steel to make stainless steel, which aka just means it has about 10% chromium in it, most of which is usually on the outside, because chromium doesn't, degrade or weather as easily, so it protects the steel from rusting. Then vanadium has seemingly peaked, although if it gets more than 1 year in a row of going back up, I'll throw it down into ambiguous, but it seemed to have peaked around 82 or 83,000 tons per year back in 2013. It's used in a lot of alloys to give metal strength, specifically knocking strength or anti-knocking strength, basically for any kind of machinery, whether it's in regular cars, electric cars, airplane engines, trains, factory parts, construction equipment. Vanadium is used in alloys for machine parts that constantly come in contact with other machine parts, and or machine parts and metals that are constantly going to be undergoing a lot of impact or vibration. Rhenium is another rare earth material. Rare, as you can see, production is measured in just tons, and seemed to have peaked back in 2008 at about 56 tons. Although it hasn't really declined, it's just wobbled along this kind of plateau. And during 2018, the total production for the year was about 48 tons. Small bits of rhenium are used in very specific alloys for metals that deal with extremely high, extremely sudden amounts of heat. Now up on the top row again, we have another battery maker metal, cobalt, measured in 1,000 tons per year, just as lithium is. However, unfortunately for us, not as abundant as lithium is, and we'll be finding that out soon enough. Production has reached about 140,000 tons a year. And again, as I've said in numerous videos before, about 60 to 70% of global cobalt production comes out of a single country, the Democratic, in quotation marks, Republic of the Congo. But cobalt is necessary for the manufacture of batteries, especially electric vehicle batteries, which obviously demand for is now exploding because we're in a big rush to switch over to electric vehicles away from liquid fuel. Granted, it's not going as fast as some people thought or hoped, but it is still happening. Talc production has peaked, although it has declined really, really slowly, and most recently actually started to seem like it was going to kick back up. So I'm probably going to move it down into ambiguous, but over time it has taken a net loss overall, so I'm keeping it here probably just for this year. It peaked around 9.5 million tons per year, and since then has really gradually fallen down, and as of the moment is right above 7 million tons per year. Talc is a white mineral that we ground up into powder, and those fine powdery talc particles are then used for filler in the manufacturing of rubber, manufacturing of some plastics, the manufacturing of paper. Talc is part of what makes paper so absorbent. So in decent part, talc is what allows us to have, nice, useful modern toilet paper. Tantalum, sometimes called coltan, is probably going to get put back up on the top row if it resumes increasing after this flat line that we've had for the last year or two since 2017. It did initially peak at about 1,500 tons per year and then dropped, but now over the last decade or so has been increasing again. So I'm probably going to bump it up to the top row. And tantalum is usually a little known metal that's used in a few very specific alloys. Aluminum production is still increasing, and our high point so far was back in 2017, where it hit about 315 million tons. Arsenic production has peaked. Arsenic is also, I think, the only one I forgot to actually give a side label to of what the measurement actually is. Arsenic, although the first instinct that your mind goes to is just a poison, it's actually now being consumed, as I mentioned earlier, by the making of LEDs, computer semiconductors, and also scanning lasers. Clay is also in the ambiguous section. We peaked back in 2002, or seemingly at around 67 million tons per year, and fell down, but then we've been gradually coming back up since then. Clay, obviously, I can assume almost all of you have to know, is primarily used as a construction material. It's what bricks are made out of. We move on to gold, whose production is still increasing, but by increasingly less amounts, measured in 1,000 tons per year. Most recently, global gold production was 3,200 tons a year, or just over it. And again, like silver and platinum and palladium, gold is no longer mainly a thing for jewelry. Gold is now a critical component of civilization in the form of semiconductors and transistors inside of all our computerized devices. And also as the nanowire filaments inside of many LED light bulbs. Boron production has taken a large upward spike recently, but has then come back down, and for the past year or so, leveled off, seemingly. It almost reached 10 million tons per year, but now it's standing sort of just below 9 million tons per year. And the big consumer of boron is to make borosilicate glass and other types of borated glass, which basically means high-strength glass. And for the moment at least, niobium production is still increasing, now just under 70,000 tons per year. Niobium is another metal that's like vanadium and chromium. It's almost never used by itself. It's incorporated into various alloys. It particularly tends to give some more bending strength. So the metals remain flexible. They can still bend to the degrees that the manufacturer wants them to. However, when niobium is incorporated, they're much less likely to actually bend and break. Vermiculite is down here in the ambiguous category, as it peaked, then came back down, and then it plateaued, and then it came back down, and it's plateaued again, but has started climbing again. Vermiculite is a particular type of mineral that is very important for buildup of soils and for soil restoration, actually. And over here we have selenium. It shot up to about 3,300 tons per year, but then it came back down. Now it's climbing back up again. Selenium is used in various chemical compounds, various miscellaneous alloys. However, it is now quickly being consumed in large amounts in the manufacturing of solar panels. Kyanite, down here in the ambiguous category, is a bluish-looking mineral, or at least most of the time. and it's kind of stayed in this plateau range, jagged and bumpy as it may be, around 400,000 tons per year. Kyanite is used as a heat-resistant building material, which means it's particularly used for the interior walls of furnaces, blast furnaces, combustion chambers of power plants. Manganese production still increasing, up around 18 million tons per year. I should finish this video just in time to go get my laundry. Tellurium production, we've dropped for 1 year, but mainly it has been still increasing. Tellurium is a rare earth metal, measured only in tons, and is being consumed for solar panels, alongside cadmium. Cadmium tellurium is one of the primary solar panel ingredients. Potash, or basically just potassium oxide, our primary source of potassium for potassium fertilizer and also for potassium chemical additives to countless things. Potash mining production has still been going up over the years. Cadmium, the other one, the other ingredient to cadmium tellurium solar panels that I was talking about, more abundant than tellurium at least, measured in 1,000 tons per year, and has been increasing. This sudden climb here mainly being from the sudden installation of large amounts of solar power. Limestone production still increasing, now up over 400 million tons per year. Limestone is of course used as a construction material. Magnesium production still increasing, although the majority of that came from this massive upsurge when China opened this massive set of mining operations out in the West. Magnesium is alloyed in a lot of metals and a lot of various machine parts. Feldspar is still really gradually increasing, now up to about 25 million tons a year. Feldspar is also primarily used as a construction material. It's used as a filler or an aggregate. It's used in paint. It's used to make drywall. Soda ash, also known as sodium carbonate, and production over the course of time has gotten up to about 15 million tons per year. Sulfur, used for so many different things, so many chemicals, the production of so many other types of chemicals, and sulfur is mined. However, a lot of it is also separated out of petroleum, coal, and natural gas. And production has recently hit about 80 million tons per year. Perlite is another one of the minerals that gets used in construction. It's used for plaster a lot, and it's up at around 4.5 million tons or so. Salt, just general, regular salt. Despite most people's assumptions, the overwhelming majority of salt that we get access to is actually mined. It's not distilled or desalinated from ocean water. So we actually mine salt, a huge amount of which gets used as road salt to make sure that roads don't ice over in the winter in colder regions. And a huge part of it is also used in the chemical industry to get a hold of chloride and to be used to manufacture all kinds of different chemicals and things that we use in our daily lives. And I think stone is the last one. I'm not sure. I think it is. Actually, I'll just go ahead and check. Yep, stone's the end. Okay. So stone, just general stone. Stone is basically, it would be ambiguous. It would always be ambiguous because stone isn't referring to anything really specific. It's referring to just general good old rocks that aren't any of the specific types that we already talked about. So stone is primarily used as a construction material, as aggregates, as filler, as actual material itself, used to make concrete, you make cement, anything and everything. Just some good old stone from the quarry next door. You dig it up, you grind it up, and then you build a civilization out of it. And it had a peak of sorts in 2006, right before, the financial crisis and collapse began. It had its peak back then, about 1.7 billion tons per year, and was flat, during the whole economic problems, but has begun climbing its way up again, and is now back above 1.4 billion tons per year. And so we'll see where it goes from there. All right. Well, hopefully that wasn't too boring. I know it was pretty boring, but that's the end of this. So thank you for listening and checking out these graphs and stuff that I wasted all my time making. So thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, obviously leave a like on the video. If you like energy and resources and that kind of stuff, then subscribe and stick around. Support me financially if you feel like it through the links down in the description below, PayPal, Patreon, shop, everything. Good night on my end, and I will see you all around next time.